Good morning. I'm Sally Levine, the Executive Director of the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust. Welcome to our program, Holocaust Myths and Misconceptions, Common Questions about the Holocaust. One of the questions people ask is, how could Hitler have made the Holocaust happen? Hitler could not have made the Holocaust happen all by himself. He believed that life was a racial struggle. The Holocaust actually happened because individuals, organizations, and governments made choices that allowed it to happen. In addition to the SS, the German government, military, and Nazi Party officials who planned and implemented policies aimed at persecuting and murdering the European Jews, there were many ordinary people, civil servants, doctors, lawyers, judges, soldiers, railroad workers, clerks, who played a role in the Holocaust. Millions of ordinary people witnessed the crimes of the Holocaust in the countryside, in the cities, in stores, in schools, in homes and offices and workplaces. Across Europe, the Nazis found countless willing helpers who collaborated or were complicit in their crimes. What motives and pressures led so many individuals to abandon their fellow human beings? Some of these collaborators were simply workers. Here we see an ID card that is marked in 2 different languages, and it says Jew in both French and Flemish. This comes from Belgium in 1943. It was issued by Belgian authorities in compliance with German decrees. Police checks at railroad and transit stations made it difficult for the bearers of these marked cards to avoid arrest. Many ordinary men and women assisted the perpetrators of the Holocaust simply by doing their jobs. Some worked in offices, keeping records of where Jews lived or what property and belongings were confiscated. Some, like in this image, marked documents that identified Jews. Some manufactured deadly chemicals. Others drove those chemicals to the killing centers, while others willingly and knowingly transported victims to these killing centers where they were murdered. Let's watch a portion of this interview, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the interviewee, Stefan Kucharek.
Jak to było? Znaczy pan ich brał skąd, tych Żydów?
Z Małkini.
Z Małkini. Tak. Były długie
Tak,
pociągi.
sobie po 42, 4 wagony. Proszę pana, na pół rozdzielaliśmy. A mieliśmy tyle spychany do cebulki. O wiesz, to tu bocznica szła.
Aha,
to tu, tędy. Tędy chodź tutaj. Bo tu była rzutnica. O tu. Do bramy dojeżdżaliśmy, proszę pana, tutaj. Wstawialiśmy, proszę pana, wagony. Brama się zamykała.
Pani tylko odstawił.
Odstawiłem, proszę pana, Żydów wysadzili. Ja wagony zabrałem i koniec. I muzyka się urwała.
Czy pan widział, w jaki sposób tych Żydów wysadzali z pociągów?
Nie, już nie było możliwości.
No ale wiesz, pociąg stał z panem.
Nie, proszę pana, od razu, proszę pana, jak odczepili mnie parowóz, to ja się cofnąłem jakieś, panie, z 50 metrów. Proszę pana, i oni tam robili, co chcieli. To już ja nie wiem, tego ja nie powiem panu. Bo ja tego nie widziałem. Inaczej jak zrobić tam, jak pan się doszedł, to od razu łeb i koniec.
No ale potem pan przyjeżdżał po te wagony już puste.
A tak, no to przyjeżdżał. Nie, staliśmy, proszę pana, jakieś ile, z pół godziny. Proszę pana, i brama się otworzyła. No i to nie wiem, komek. No. Jechaliśmy, właśnie raz panu zaczepiłem za wagony, jechałem do Cypinskiego. I później w Śląskiej odstawiliśmy panie, te puste wagony i wzięli sceny drugie pół. I znów przypchali.
Czy pan widział te wagony już puste, jak wyglądały? Miał pan okazję zobaczyć je?
A miałem. To co to pan, jak to było zabrudzone, zasłane za tego. Jak pan, jak to ktoś mówi.
Te wagony były potem sprzątane, fałki.
Tak. I to sprzątali Żydzi.
So what could he have been thinking about when he realized that the trains were empty when he brought them back? Stefan Kucharek was born in 1922 in Poland, the son of a train engineer. He attended school with Jewish neighbors and later worked in a sawmill. After the German invasion of Poland, Kucharek began working for the railroad doing track maintenance. Later, he drove trains full of Jews to the Treblinka killing center. Stefan Kucharek drove those transports regularly for almost a year. Some were judges. Here we see members of the Berlin Criminal Court give the Nazi salute. This is on October 1st, 1936, the first day that judges were required to wear the Nazi eagle and swastika emblem. And you can see that they're all wearing them on their robes. Judges had the power that might have changed the course of history. They could have challenged the legitimacy of the Nazi regime and the many laws that restricted political freedoms and civil rights. Instead, they made the Holocaust legal. Most judges, in fact, supported the Nazi regime. They upheld the new restrictive laws and interpreted them in ways that helped the Nazis to carry out their political agenda and ultimately genocide. And this is a photograph that horrifies me as an educator. Some were teachers. Here we see 10 and 11-year-old school children in Berlin. This is with their teacher, who you can see on the far left, and this was taken in 1934. Hitler took power in 1933, so this is not that far afterwards. Public school teachers were required to join the Nazi Teachers Union, and like other civil servants, they had to take an oath of loyalty, not to the state, but to Hitler as their leader, as Führer. Educators willingly taught Nazi pseudoscience, reinforcing Nazi racial ideology. Education became a propaganda tool of the Nazi regime. Educators taught that Jews belonged to a foreign race and that they posed a biological threat to the strength and health of the real German people. And here's an interesting testimony. This was given by Fritzi Fritzhall. She is currently the lay leader of the Illinois Holocaust Museum, and here she describes her experience in school after the German annexation of Czechoslovakia, where she and her family lived.
My first recollection was when I went to school. The night before going to school, my friend who was not Jewish, she and I slept in our home, slept in the same bed, played as children do. I remember my mother opening the door and telling us to go to sleep because we were being noisy, and the next day was school. She and I got up in the morning to go to school one morning. When we came to school, she was allowed to walk in, and the door was closed to me. I was told I was not allowed to walk into class anymore. I needed to go home because I was Jewish. A teacher, who was my teacher, who took out a white handkerchief from his pocket the week before to wipe a smudge off of my face, turned to me one day and told me I must not come to school anymore. All of a sudden, for whatever reason, I needed to go back home and not come back to school. I remember going home and crying, and not understanding why I was not allowed to go to school anymore. A few minutes later, my two brothers came home crying. They too were sent back home and were told not to go to school anymore because we became, quote, Jewish overnight. My mother had to sit down with us and tell us the facts of life. Tell us why we were not allowed to go to school anymore. Tell us that the country was invaded by a man called Hitler, who was a bad man. We did not know about the killings at that time, at least I didn't. But we were told that there were certain rules we needed to follow from now on, and one was not to go to public school.
More than half a century after this incident, the pain for Fritzi is still real. We can see it in her face. Teachers can and do have enormous power. Some collaborators were physicians. Here we see Dr. Karl Klauberg on the far left, who conducted cruel experiments at Auschwitz, mostly on Jewish prisoners. Physicians were drawn to Nazism for many reasons. The medical profession had a large number of Jews practicing in Germany. In fact, in 1933, although Jews were less than 1% of the population, they made up 11% of German practicing physicians. Many physicians supported the barring of Jewish doctors from state-run clinics and hospitals, and also supported later measures which prevented Jewish doctors from practicing at all. During the worldwide economic depression, they saw these restrictions on Jewish doctors as favorable to their own practices. German physicians helped carry out Nazi eugenic racial policies. They supported the Nazi aim to increase the births of healthy, German-blooded persons and decreasing those of persons viewed as genetically defective and a burden on national resources. Family doctors helped to identify candidates for forced sterilization. Doctors and other medical personnel carried out the approximately 400,000 sterilization procedures. After World War II began, Nazi policies escalated to killing, and physicians and nurses were perpetrators in the murder of children and adults who were deemed incurably ill. Medical professionals participated in the euthanasia or T4 program for the secret murders of institutionalized Germans. Many of these health professionals, having gotten experience in this particular program, moved on in 1942 and were given control and power over the mass gassing programs at the killing centers, including Auschwitz. Some were also religious leaders. Here we see Roman Catholic clerics giving the Nazi salute. This was at a Catholic youth rally, and it was in a stadium in Berlin, Germany, August 20th, 1933. This is less than 6 months after Hitler took power. Many leaders of German Protestant and Roman Catholic churches were complicit in the persecution of Jews. Before and at the beginning of Nazi rule, Germany's spiritual leaders failed to speak out against hateful speech and violence. After 1933, they failed to speak out against legal measures that progressively stripped Jews of their rights. A small minority of religious leaders spoke out against Nazi racism or gave sermons condemning the persecution of Germany's Jews. Others provided aid, and some even hid Jews. Churches and communities across Germany also facilitated the implementation of racial laws by providing baptismal records, a proof of non-Jewish descent. Church responses to the persecution of Jews were shaped by historic and religious anti-Semitism. Clergy and church leaders were also influenced by larger political and social trends in Germany after World War I. There was also a fear of godless communism after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 in Russia. Because of the history of persecution of the Roman Catholic Church in Germany, Catholic leaders were more suspicious of the Nazi Party. They focused on preserving Catholic institutions, from schools to youth groups, and as with some Protestant churches, protecting baptized members of Jewish descent who were persecuted under Nazi racial law. Some church leaders did speak out against the forced sterilization of persons with disabilities. Some also spoke out against the killing of institutionalized Germans in the euthanasia killing program. By the time of Kristallnacht, the violent assault on Jews of November 9th and 10th, 1938, no church leader of influence had spoken out to protest. And some were policemen. Here we see French police arresting Jewish men. Most of the men they were arresting were Polish-born, and they were among 3,747 men transported in 4 trains to French-guarded internment camps southwest of Paris. This photo was taken in Paris on May 14, 1941. German officials relied on the help of local police, who mostly obeyed their superiors in the chain of command, some more zealously than others. All over Nazi-occupied Europe, the same scenes played out, sometimes in collaboration in arrests of Jews or the deportation of Jews to concentration camps and killing centers, and sometimes in mass beatings and shootings. Policemen helped to carry out the persecution and murder of millions of people. And these documents we see here record the count of men and women and children who were detained in the famous Paris Veldiv Stadium roundup. Many thousands were arrested on July 16th and 17th, 1942. They were then forcibly kept in miserable conditions in the stadium before being bused to the French camp at Drancy and then taken by train to Auschwitz. A registry was kept of those who were forced to wear the yellow star, and a Jewish census shows how police knew who to take and where they could be found. Meticulous handwritten lists detail personal possessions that were handed over to police. Other documents list the value of property, such as jewelry, that was confiscated, often forcibly, during the deportations. And here we see local participation of police in SS shootings. Ukrainian auxiliary police, who are marked by their white armbands, prepared to kill Jewish women under the supervision of German army personnel. To carry out these shooting operations in hundreds of communities, Germans relied on the help of tens of thousands of auxiliary police. Some were neighbors, and this photograph was taken in Germany on October 22nd, 1940. We see uniformed Gestapo officials supervise the deportation of local Jews in Lörrach. How did onlookers respond to the plight of their classmates, their co-workers, neighbors, and others whom they knew personally? In this photograph, we see citizens of a small town watch police lead Jewish men and women to trucks for deportation from Germany. Note the children peeking from behind the line of deportees. Back over here. Okay? While adults witness the event from a balcony above, up here. These Jews of Lörrach were transported to German-occupied France. In 1942, German officials, with French collaboration, later deported most of them to Auschwitz. Few survived. Amsterdam, the Netherlands, June 20th, 1943. Jews assembled for transport to the Westerbork transit camp, which was a way station to Auschwitz, are in a photograph which was taken secretly from a nearby building. Again, note the place from which the photograph is taken. Note the teacups on the windowsill And note the people looking out of their windows from the building opposite. Gregory Fenves was born in Yugoslavia in 1931. His father was the manager of the family's printing plant and was editor of a Hungarian language newspaper. The family belonged to the local synagogue, and Stephen attended public school, where he spoke Serbian. Let's listen to some testimony about Stephen and his family during deportation.
The order came to move with possessions that you could carry into this row of dilapidated houses along the freight railroad yard. One of the nastiest memories I have is getting going on that journey, and people were lined up the stairs up to the door of the apartment, waiting to ransack whatever we left behind, cursing at us, yelling at us, spitting at us as we left. Not that I remember. I don't know.
But like vultures. They
Like vultures, right? Except among them was our cook. She went in. She grabbed the cookbook, and she grabbed this folder of this binder and shoved into it all the artwork that she could shove into it.
That's quite an act.
Yep. And she gave it back to us when they came back.
Again, we see that these memories, although decades old, have a huge impact. In 1941, Hungary, allied with Nazi Germany, occupied the area where Stephen's family lived. His father was barred from employment, and the family was forced to give up most of their apartment and sell their belongings. In 1944, Hungarian gendarmes deported the extended Fenves family to Auschwitz. The Germans gassed Stephen's mother on arrival. In October 1944, Stephen was sent to a subcamp of Buchenwald. And on April 1st, 1945, he was forced on a death march to the main Buchenwald camp, where he was liberated by American troops later that month. When he returned home, the cook was there and provided him with the family artwork, including many works that were done by his mother. Now, this particular video and this testimony is very important, and we're going to see the impact of Holocaust education. So the new president of Emory University is Gregory Fenves. Gregory is the son of Stephen, and his father's experiences and stories have had a huge impact on his life. He made an interesting comment during a speech he gave in Austin, Texas, when he was then president of the University of Texas. And he said, "I'll close by saying that I have been thinking a lot lately about the country that my grandchildren will inherit and the world their kids will live in generations from now. I want their world to be better than this one. And that's an idea I learned from my dad, who taught me of the dangers of legitimized hate and oppression and made it clear that it was our duty to speak up, to not be silent, so that injustice could be rooted out and overcome." Holocaust education gets passed on. These stories get passed on from generation to generation. And we hope and pray that these lessons will be instilled in our younger generations so they can carry them forward. Thank you for joining us today. Please email me with any questions or comments you may have about this presentation. My email address is on the slide. And we look forward to having you join us for future programs. Thank you.